You know that moment when you walk into a museum and you don't mean to take it all too seriously, but you kind of do anyway? You slow down a bit, you look a bit longer, you actually read things instead of just walking past them, because you're surrounded by a bunch of historical objects which have surpassed you. Been around far longer than you have, and at some point a thought just drifts in. Who decided this should all be here, in this way, designed this way, set this way? Not in a dramatic way, all of a sudden, like I did at the beginning with the hellos, but just out of curiosity. What got kept, what got stored away, and what never made it far enough to be called important as of yet. Or you get a thought of, when will it be important? If you ever had all of those thoughts all at once, to the point where it's kind of overwhelmed you, then I would say this episode's for you. My name is Simran Sanghera. I am a fourth-year student studying art history and film and television. I'm the student rep and the current Access to intern at the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum here at the University of Exeter. Today we are talking about, basically, this is one of the most wide-ranging, leading cinema museums in the UK. Not the oldest, but definitely, we've got a lot here. It was basically founded in the 1990s, and the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum eventually opened up to the public in 1997. What began as a personal collection put together by filmmaker Bill Douglas and his lifelong friend and honorary patron of the museum, Peter Jewell, who sadly passed away in March of last year, has grown into an archive of over 93,000 items, spanning from the 17th century all the way to present day. And God, it's kind of mad when you really think about it, especially when you consider film itself is a relatively young medium. It's barely over a century old. And yet it's already left behind an overwhelming amount of material, stories, and physical traces of how people have watched, made, and talked about film and moving images. That's why I think it would be really interesting to discuss why curatorial responsibility feels so important to talk about here. So, hi Phil, I am joined today by Phil Wickham, curator of the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum. Before this, Phil was a television curator at the BFI, and he also writes and lectures extensively about British film and television. So, how are you, Phil?
Fine, thanks, Simran. Thanks for asking me.
No, I'm really excited about today because Phil is someone who knows the museum inside out. All the boxes, the drawers. When you enter through the lower gallery and into our actual office, we have so much actually there. And it's incredibly impressive, but also mildly, intimidating when I first volunteered with you, Phil. How, you were able to, I guess, tell me where every single thing was, especially because, there's so many different boxes, especially in terms of the organisation that we uphold, because I feel like there's a certain standard to it.
Yes. Well, I'm sorry. I hope you didn't feel intimidated, Simran. I hope you don't now. But yeah, it's part of my job is to know where stuff is,
Yeah.
We've accumulated a lot of material over the time I've been here. I've been here since 2008, so I've been here a while now.
Yeah.
It's really exciting building up the museum, if you like, for the public.
Wanted to get into, so before you joined the Bill Douglas Museum in 2008, what kind of led you into the role of being head curator, and what was your path?
Well, I'd worked at the BFI for about 17 years at that time. I'd worked in the information service and then as a curator, as you say, largely the TV material. So I was used to working with collections. The job came up. I was keen to move back to the southwest, and my wife teaches here, so I was very keen to join her. It seemed to be an amazing opportunity to work with a collection, to make it better known. And as I've over the years, discover that the collection will give you a new surprise every day. There is something to discover each day. And together, the 93,000 objects that we have give a really comprehensive, a really diverse, but also really coherent history of the moving image. Particularly, we call it a people's history of the moving image. So it's about how people have responded to what they've seen on screen. It's about the audiences that have watched the films and also the people that have made the films. We have filmmakers' archives and things like that. So I think together it gives a really strong story to tell people about why film matters, why moving images matter. Because obviously we do go before film. As you say, we go right back to the 17th century, but we see that as all one story, all one.
I was about to say, what kind of photography stuff do we have at the museum as well? Because I know we do film slides, but
We do, yeah, we do have photography where it relates to the moving image, and of course, you can't have film without photography. So we have some things on, the big pioneers like Fox Talbot or Louis Daguerre, who also engaged with moving image entertainments like dioramas. And we have the way that photography entwines with the moving image and becomes a distinctive part of it. Once you have photography and once you also have the persistence of vision that you get in the animated toys, put those together and you've got cinema.
That's amazing. Because I'm going to touch on this later about the actual construction of all of this coming together. And in terms of the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum, we've had a pretty big year in 2025, and I'd love to really discuss that and kind of celebrate it in a way. So, we've had new acquisitions, new visitor records, new exhibitions, and a lot of different conversations, I guess, about how cinema history has, I guess, developed.
Yeah. It was quite a tumultuous year. So it had some big highs, it had a big low because we lost Peter, of course, in March, and it was. Peter had been such a huge part of the museum. It was, the collection that he put together with Bill Douglas. The story of Bill and Peter is a fabulous and fascinating story that I think everyone really engages with.
Yeah.
Peter was so passionate about the collection, which, didn't always make it easy, but it was always, he and I got on really well. It was a real joy to work with him, even though he was so emotionally invested in the collection. It was such a kind of part of the amazing friendship that he had with Bill. So to lose him and to lose our greatest cheerleader was very sad. But I'm pleased in some ways that he left us when things were going really well for the museum, and we've had a very busy year. We've had some great new staff join us. Sarah and Barry and Natasha have joined us because we got some funding from the Higher Education Museums, Galleries and Collection Fund. So we've now got a big team. For years it was just two of us, and now it's a team
it's really developed.
4 posts, 6 people. We've got big plans. We're very ambitious. We're hoping to expand the museum. We're putting in for funding to the lottery and others to try and do that. Obviously, it's not the best time in world history to ask for loads of money, but the university understand the importance of the museum as a unique asset of Exeter, and they're giving us support, and we're hoping that we can raise money to get the kind of facilities that the collection deserves. So we really do need now bigger galleries, more gallery space and more storage space, because this is a unique world-beating collection, we think, and it deserves to be shown to its best advantage and for people to be able to engage with it in all sorts of new ways.
Definitely. I would love to ask as well, in terms of, I guess, preservation and stuff like that, when it comes to the museum, has anything developed within the past year? I guess in terms of techniques, or have you learned anything in the past year?
Yeah, I mean, we're always trying to sort of interpret the collection in new ways and get that out there. Our conditions are not ideal; they never have been. But we've got expertise now in the team from Matt and from Christy, Barry, who are enabling us to help look after the collections better. But we haven't got the best kind of storage conditions that we'd like. But in terms of taking the collection forward, we are able to improve that. We've improved things like the lighting. We've had help from the university to make sure that the light from the galleries is not damaging the collection, things like that. So we've made some big strides forward, I think. But the the big task, of course, is to get the stories from the collection to the people. We're people's history, and I think we're doing that. We've got some great exhibitions. So this year, 2026, I think it's going to be an exciting year.
Yeah.
We've got a big new exhibition on ancient Egypt on screen, the land of the pharaohs, opening in a couple of weeks. Curated by Barry, who's a bit of an expert in this.
What's Barry's background?
Well, Barry was the curator at Torquay Museum. He's from an archaeology background, and he knows an awful lot about ancient Egypt. And he's found that we've got actually huge, rich holdings in the collection. You'd think, well, what's a cinema museum got to do with ancient Egypt if our earliest things the 17th century? Well, it turns out, obviously, that ancient Egypt has influenced a great many things. There's been films, obviously, with ancient Egypt as a setting, whether it's Cleopatra or, Gods of Egypt or whatever.
I guess also in the representation as well, because I feel like it's definitely, at least I remember some films, at least from the early 1980s, that had really elaborate film sets to do with Egypt.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, in the 1920s and 1930s, ancient Egypt was a great basis for design. So cinemas used ancient Egyptian art as a basis for the way that they were built and the decoration within them. So obviously Grauman's Egyptian Theatre in Hollywood is the most famous, and we've got a lovely programme from that. But we've also got some fabulous stuff from British venues. So there was the Egyptian Hall, where some of the first film shows took place in London in the 1890s.
Were those festivals or exhibition projects? Or?
They were. In the Egyptian Hall was in Piccadilly in London, and it was a venue where magic shows happened. And some of the first people to use film in Britain were magicians who used it for creating kind of trickery on screen and in live performances. So people like David Devant and people like that used film. And the Egyptian Hall was their venue. So has an important role in film history, and of course that was it was done out like an ancient Egyptian temple, and some of these cinemas built in the 1920s and 1930s, like the Carlton in Islington, for example, where the Astoria in Streatham, they were done out in the same kind of way. So we've got lovely programmes from those that Barry will be showing, and of course we're looking at contemporary Egypt as well. We're looking at some Egyptian cinema, and the collection, of course, was born in Egypt because that's where Peter and Bill met, on national service. Yeah, and they did national service in the RAF in the early 1950s. They were based in Egypt. That's where they met each other.
Such an interesting turnaround, actually.
Yeah, and that's where the collection began, where they first met. So it has an important role for us. So that will be in the first half of the year. And then around late May, we'll be doing a new big exhibition, which will celebrate the centenary of Marilyn Monroe, who was born 100 years ago on the 1st of June.
I've seen a lot of memorabilia around the museum, especially in terms of Marilyn.
800, 900 Marilyn things.
Wow.
So we'll be doing a nice exhibition for that as well.
How much space do you have for that? Is it?
It'll be in my main reception area again.
Okay.
So take you over from the Egypt one. And Sarah's got loads of amazing plans for events and kind of activities for kids and for families, but also for other groups as well. So we've got loads of things coming up this year.
And that's all been shown as well through the Instagram and LinkedIn posts that we have for the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum.
Yeah, Sarah's all over social media and has got great. We've got we're on
great outreach at the
Instagram,
minute.
LinkedIn, all those things.
Yeah. So I feel like we work with so much material here, through the museum, and at the moment, we're still working through the Cambridge Film Festival archives, and there's so much there, and I was just wondering, especially from a film critical perspective, do you have any films that you instinctively defend, or even when you know they're unpopular, or even when you know they're in bad taste? And I feel like this is an interesting question to ask you because you work with so many different genres.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not about unpopular. I mean, I think it's important to put films in their context. That's part of what we try and do. We are the link between the film itself and the context in which they're made and seen. So there might be some things in films of the past that feel a bit uncomfortable now and so on, but you've got to understand them in the context of the time.
True, because you could have marketing and the production people.
Yeah. But also, sometimes the meaning has things take on different meanings over time, but also they reflect the times in which we're made. Shouldn't sort of hide from that. That you should you can use that to discover more about topics and things like that. I think you can discover new films and new really interesting things through the collection. You might open a box of films from the 1920s. There's no reason why somebody your age would have ever heard of any of these films. But, looking at them, you'll discover whole new kind of stories and different ways of thinking. And the kind of material we have, there was a critic called Raymond Williams. He used to talk about structure of feeling, might have done him. So, you look at something and you realise how people might have felt at the time, what kind of assumptions were made through the material.
It's very subjective.
Yeah, and it can really bring you back to that moment. Can get rid of all the hindsight that comes with being a person in 2026, and it can make you feel like, what did people in 1926 think about these things? It can bring you to that. So I think there's always new things to discover, and of course we all have our different preferences.
No, definitely.
I had another. Some of my team are very big on sci-fi, for example. I
was going to ask you your top three. I hadn't asked you this in the beginning, but I don't know. Do you have a top three or
I'm not sure if I have a top three. There's things I like. So
what about at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I've had this argument with my colleagues for quite a bit. Some of them really love sci-fi fantasy.
Yeah.
I'm more of a gritty realism man, or comedy or thrillers and things are things that I would like really. But everyone has their own different preferences. And even though I'm not a big sci-fi fan, I can see the importance of all the Star Wars memorabilia that we have, the way it speaks to our society, speaks about way, and also just the relationship that people build up with those films is really significant. Why is that series of films spawned so much collecting, for example? What is it about them?
Fandoms and fans.
Yeah, so that's always fascinating.
No, I feel like there's definitely different approaches that you can kind of look at different materials in. Have you ever noticed you've always had to look at different collections differently? Because I know we have scripts and we have different I guess collections within the museum, but I just wanted to know whether there's ever been any different approaches that you've had to consider, especially when it comes to preservation, or maybe we've talked about this before, but I just feel I guess in a more specific format, because I know it's been a problem in the past, but I know it's...
Well, we always have to think about space. Do we have the space for stuff? So if people offer me material, as they do all the time, there are certain things I need to think about. Is, have we already got it? There's no point in us taking duplicate material of things we already hold. Do we have the space to house it? Mm-hmm. Obviously, yes, if it's in really bad condition, is it worth taking at all, is one thing. But also I'm thinking about, is this going to enhance the collection? Is it going to be something that people are going to research? Is it something we can use for teaching? Is it something people want to see in a display case? Because those would be my main criteria. I want things to be used. It's no point in us just being a kind of repository. We want people to engage with the material.
Definitely.
So you do have to have selection. We can't take everything we're offered. And there's some things that we don't take because other kinds of museums might take them. We don't take big machines. People offer us big projectors or editing machines. We haven't got the space for that. But also that doesn't really fit with our acquisitions policy. Something like, Bradford would be the obvious place for them to go with those kind of materials. So we need to sort of complement other collections. Really as well. But yeah, those are the criteria I'm kind of looking for. So the Cambridge one is an example that I know you've been working on yourself. So we were offered this, the Cambridge Arts Cinema, been a successful art cinema, closed quite suddenly in 1999. They basically deposited quite suddenly all their materials, so all the publicity materials they'd acquired over the years, onto their local archive in Cambridgeshire. Now, of course, that material's got nothing to do with Cambridgeshire, so it was not really any use to them, and it just sat there for 25 years. And then we were offered it. I did manage to create a holiday to have a quick look at the material, and I thought, this is actually great. This is loads of fascinating publicity materials, lovely posters.
Definitely educated me a lot on the different types of marketing there could be, especially when it comes to posters, or I guess when it comes to lobby cards.
And it shows a way about how these films are predominantly art house films, but not entirely, but predominantly. A lot of foreign films, how are these sold to the public in Britain? How do people relate to them? When you see a poster, what strategies are they doing? How are they trying to sell the film through the images? So it's an amazing collection. You know, I think it's a way of discovering new things. I remember you getting really excited by some Eastern European films that you weren't familiar with before, but you got interested in them through some of those things, and then you curated your own exhibition based on that. Yeah.
I feel like it definitely gets you to think more critically, I guess, about like marketing strategies, and we'll touch on this later because I feel like at the moment we're in the midst of award season, and there's a lot of talk, I guess, around the relationship between marketing and I guess how popular a film can be, or how successful a film can be, or like the notoriety, I guess. But we'll touch on that later because I feel that's a very big topic to talk about.
Yeah.
But to kind of move on, I'd love to ask you, if your job was a film genre, or if it was a film, what would it be?
Well, it's a tough one.
I was thinking Night of the Museum, but I was like, I'm not quite sure.
Well, I'm a bit of a film noir fan, so I can see, if it's a genre, the job has got to be film noir. Mm-hmm. I'd like to be Humphrey Bogart, if that's all right.
Nice.
Those are films I really love, and somehow that kind of idea of nothing is quite what it seems. You know, there's something unexpected happens every day. That's pretty much like being a curator. So yeah.
Oh God, that's amazing. Like, I feel like, especially when you're inside of the collection, hopefully listeners listening to this can understand that if you are a student or an academic or a researcher, you can interact with the contents of the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum in so many different ways. Could you highlight some of those?
Yeah. I mean, it's there to be used. You know, we are for everybody. Obviously, we're open to the galleries are free and open every day. We're open to the public, of course. But if you're a student, if it's, you're in halls, it's a dull, wet Sunday, come along, just explore the galleries. You've got time. You'll never have more time than this. You know, sometimes students say, "Oh, I'm so busy." You know, believe you me, it's going to get worse.
Definitely a nice walkthrough as well. When you come up to campus, if you're not aware, when you go up, I think is it St. David's Hill? I'm not quite sure of the road names, but it's basically the big main hill to campus. You come all the way up and you're right opposite St. Mary's Chapel, and right next to that and Robert Studios is the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum.
That's right,
within the old library. And I feel like one of the main things I get when I've talked to people about the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum is like one of the main things is, where is it? And people do know the museum. They love the museum. They have talked to me about like, oh, we just went for a little walk around, but it was nice.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's because it's free, it's open to everyone.
Yeah.
And obviously, if students are using it for study, which they should, if you're a film student like yourself, film students should definitely be using it all the time. But of course, it can also be used, and we do use it, for all sorts of other disciplines. So art history, drama, English, even the sciences. There is material there that you can use, and anyone can access the collection. So we can only display at the moment about 1,000 or so objects. We've got 93,000. Our catalogue's all online. Anything can be accessed. You just can create a little collection online. It's a really intuitive, easy website.
It's a pretty easy interface to look at. Yeah.
And you can create a collection. You make an appointment to come and look at it in the reading room, which is open Monday to Friday, 10 to 12:30, and then 1:30 to 4:30 every day. Just give us 48 hours notice so that we've got time to retrieve the material for you, and then you can book in and see anything you want to see. And that's the case for students at the college, anybody, member of the public who's interested in stuff. We're open to absolutely everybody. And of course, if you're an academic here, then you can really add something to your course by using our items. We'll bring the material to the classroom so the students can work with primary materials really closely. And this is an opportunity they're not really going to get anywhere else. So it's really something that's unique to Exeter.
I was about to say, I took a module last term, Art in the Modern Industry. We were able to have really great material in there, like different print media and stuff like that. That was really useful. Yeah. But that comes from special collections, which I guess is...
And from us, yeah. We provided lots of material for that. So
there was also, I think I used for one of my assignments, Miriorama, which was really interesting to look at, I guess, on a more analytical perspective, looking at the design and how it's constructed and stuff like that, and how it relates, I guess, to so many different intersections within the museum. Because I guess when you walk in through the museum, there's a certain level and structure to it. So at the top, when you walk in on the left-hand side, I want to say left-hand
Yeah.
side, you have obviously...
Yeah, so the upper gallery is really about 1910-ish to now.
Yeah.
So that's got cinema going, which is one of our key things.
Mm-hmm.
It's got British cinema. It's got filmmakers, because one of the big questions that we like to ask is, who makes the films? Now, of course, we're named after a great director. We think directors are great, but there's far more people than that involved in a film. You know that as a filmmaker. It's a collaborative medium. We want to show the stories of other people involved in the film. You know, obviously we've got this big project on women filmmakers at the moment, including script writers, continuity people, all of these kind of roles. We've got in that upper gallery, we've also got Chaplin, we've got animation, we've got the biggest Disney collection in the UK. We've got stars, we've got blockbusters. And then downstairs, we go right back in time. So you're going back in time to the beginnings of cinema, but also magic lanterns, animated toys, panoramas, shadow puppets. And we're always linking the past to the present. So you might think, oh, what's something in 1820 got to do with me? If you look at something like the panoramas, which were kind of 360-degree immersive media, I mean, in their concept, these are exactly the same as virtual reality. You know, these things are not new. They're drawing on things that people have always thought about, and were built to quite a sophisticated specification. So without electricity, without all of the kind of advantages we had,
It's all
people
interlinked.
200 years ago were building these amazing things to try and get these kind of feelings and sensations that we look at from virtual reality and other things now.
When it comes to, I guess, your personal experience, I feel like we've touched a lot on how other people have interacted with collections and how they feel from collections. So in your personal experience, what's been, I guess, a personal, project or object for you, which has really sparked like a story for you and kind of influenced your time here?
Well, there's been so many, really. I mean, I came here and I knew a fair bit about film and TV. I knew almost nothing about pre-cinema. That whole area was pretty new to me, and that's been exciting to discover more about those early optical media. There's all sorts of objects. Every object has a story, and also can link us to the present day. As I say, I mean, just to draw on one example, if you go to the stars case, you'll see a sort of handkerchief there. Now, that's actually a mourning cloth for the funeral of Rudolph Valentino.
Oh, wow.
And we also have an invitation to that funeral, which belonged to Mabel Normand.
Yeah.
Now, there's a whole load of stories there. Mabel Normand was an early film comedy star, but also a director. She directed Chaplin in early shorts. Rudolph Valentino, the first great heartthrob filmmaker, film star. He was an Italian star who was very popular in Hollywood for a period in the 1920s and then died very suddenly.
Wow.
That funeral is a really significant moment in popular culture, I think, 1926, it was 100 years ago. There was kind of mass hysteria. Fans rioted, attacked the funeral parlour where the body was held. The body was taken back on a train from New York to LA.
What's the drama behind that then?
Well, it's the beginnings of people understanding. It's beginnings of our celebrity culture.
Wow.
It's people committed suicide across America because people were still extricating fantasy from reality. This is all very early in the way that people are understanding what they see on the screen and how it impacts their own life. So from that little handkerchief, you've got this amazing event that's the beginning of our celebrity culture. You could draw a line from that to the Kardashians. Valentino, there's all sorts of interesting issues to do with sexuality, to do with race. So he was an Italian, but he played anyone who wasn't a white American Protestant, basically, whether it was maharajas, sheikhs, French princes,
So he wasn't really limited.
He had this enormous female fan base. And it's part of, what's also really interesting when you look at the material is that, cinema in its first 50 years or so was seen as a predominantly female occupation, So there's a whole load of interesting questions that come from that one object. And there's all these many, many objects like that where there's all sorts of stories can develop from what you find. Stories that are about the object itself, but also relate to kind of how we live now, how people live then, all of these kind of things. So I think there's endlessly fascinating material within the collection, and there's all sorts of new things to discover every day.
In terms of new things to discover every day, I'm going to come back to, I guess, marketing now for films and how we kind of interact with that currently. How do you think that's changed?
Yeah, it's been, I mean, it's kind of a bit annoying for us because since COVID, the amount of physical material being produced has definitely dropped. And of course, that was the sort of stuff that's our bread and butter. And it's much easier to preserve a piece of paper or a brochure than it is to try and preserve a digital file. And how, anyway, do you get access to that digital file? I can pick up a brochure from a distributor can send it to us, or a cinema can send it to us. We can pick something up in a foyer of a cinema. But if marketing materials are just going to be an encrypted file link, then how is that going to be preserved? How is that going to be shared with other people? How can it be the basis for sort of discussion and ideas like our physical material is? So that is a challenge. I don't try and claim I've got an answer to that one yet. There is still physical material, and we've got some great relationships now with our local cinemas, so we're able to capture that. But we are working on how we can capture born digital materials. I'm part of a big international group on born digital cinema materials that's being run by the BFI. I'm part of that. When it comes to filmmakers' archives, then there are some things going on with that. We're trying to work on Don Boyd, one of our big donors. Don's obviously a very important filmmaker. We have his archive, and recently we have got some born digital elements to that, so we're working with Digital Humanities on that. But it's nothing easy, file formats are very unstable. If you have a piece of paper, as long as you keep it right, it'll still be a piece of paper in 100 years' time, whereas a file, 20 years' time, it might be really hard to open. So there's quite a lot of challenges around these kind of changes.
Because I was thinking, like, in terms of more recent examples, I guess a more relatable example, Marty Supreme came out Boxing Day here in the UK technically, had a very physical media run campaign, and I feel like it had ping pong balls, it had jumpers, it had coats. Do you think we're going back to I guess more nostalgic forms of marketing?
Would it be nice? Yeah,
that would be amazing.
I'd be grateful. Yeah. Well, I think that would be good. I think people realise that are beginning to realise what's yes, obviously in many ways the digital age is great and it makes life a lot more convenient, but there is something missing sometimes.
It makes you realise what's at stake, I guess, which is the heart, I guess.
Yeah, and what if somebody my age finds inspiring as somebody your age saying, actually, I want to deal with physical material. I find that more engaging. The digital world means nothing necessarily because that's what you've grown up with, what you've expected. But you can understand the joy of a physical item because it's something new and something different. And I suppose that's what I'm hoping for cinema as a whole, is that there's endless talk about is cinema over and so on. And that's happened many times before, of course,
Yeah, because I was about to ask, what stories do you think are the easiest to lose, I guess, in that process?
Well, I mean, cinema's been under pressure before. So TV in the 50s, video in the 80s, the internet in the early 2000s, and then now with streaming and so on. I suppose the only thing now is because it comes with a certain amount of corporate muscle, that makes it a bit more difficult.
Subscriptions.
But I think that people will always enjoy the fact of sharing a moment with a bunch of strangers in a crowded room in a particular place at a particular time. I think in that everything, everywhere, all at once culture, to go to a cinema, to put everything else, all your distractions behind you, become part of a story, be surrounded by other people. I think that's got to have an attraction, even though it's a novelty rather than an everyday practice like it was in the 1930s, say. I think young people will really sort of value that kind of engagement. They might not do it every week, but I think they will want it to be there. I guess one of the big issues is that in recent years, in terms of types of stories, there is always the danger that smaller films and hidden histories and people who have been excluded from corporate culture might not get their voices heard. There's a kind of contradiction in that it's much easier to make films now than it ever used to be. But how do you get people to see them? Yeah. I mean, don't know what you think of that as a young filmmaker. But
I feel like as a young filmmaker, it's difficult to get people to watch your films. Definitely. You share a link, you get people around you to watch it, and then after that, you know?
Yeah.
What happens? You
Yeah.
know, how can you reach that reachability if the festivals don't get back to you, you know? Or if you just run out of, like, avenues such as Vimeo or YouTube or Daily Motion, you know? Like, where are you supposed to go? And it's difficult sometimes.
Yeah, and I think what some people, even within the commercial film industry, there's been a concern that what used to be regarded as kind of, I suppose, mid-budget films particularly, ones that might be aimed at adults, they're not fantasy, they're not sci-fi, they're not big, they're not obvious big screen kind of draws.
Do you mean like independent TV?
Yeah. So, I mean, things like, I don't know, Avatar or Star Wars or something, there's always going to be an argument you should see that on the big screen because it's really big and spectacular. But I suppose, smaller films about contemporary life or something, there might be a tendency for people to think, I can just watch that on streaming on telly, it doesn't make any difference. But of course, you're not immersed in the story in the same way, and it doesn't have quite the same impact. So I know that there's been various talk about some of those films, are no longer commercially viable in the same way, and that would be a great shame because you want the sort of multiplicity of different kinds of stories be available to all people, really. Exactly. Cinema allows that.
Yeah, because I feel like especially when you can't get access to, I guess, all these different things, it's harder to control, I guess, your taste, which I think is very important, I think, when you watch things and when you read things and when you, I guess, consume things. And I think that's why the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum is so important for that, because it preserves that taste and it gives you these avenues to, I guess, Egyptian cinema or maybe, I guess, in my opinion, Eastern European cinema, which has completely floored me and it's amazing. Yeah,
that's the problem with the algorithm, is the algorithm will tell you to like what you've already liked. And what you want to do is to discover new things sometimes and things that you never thought you'd like, and be exposed to those, which hopefully, being a film student, you do get anyway. But, I think that's really important, and people need to have the opportunity to see all sorts of things and discover whole new things that they might not have been aware of.
But I guess, like, when it comes to, I guess we've talked so much about physical media in this episode, and its physical film objects are central to what makes the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum what it is, because we've got scrapbooks, memorabilia, postcards, posters, God, it's endless. And I'm going to go back to digital again and kind of draw the comparison, because you already touched on this before, but just to re-emphasize, what can physical media do that digital media cannot?
Well, I think it brings it. Yeah, I think it has a more of an emotional connection.
Yeah.
I think you're handling something that somebody handled in 1926. That got to mean something. You're looking at something physically that was, has been in other people's hands. That I think it can bring you back to that moment. It can make you feel like what's it like to be a person in 1926? I know, I'll open this up and I'll
It's a
feel
visceral
like
experience.
Yeah. And of course, part of you will always be a modern person, but it would give you an insight into what that might have been like, and then you can see the connections between now and then much more clearly. I mean, I think if you're seeing a digital image, that can be helpful. It can be useful to access that, but I don't think it's quite the same. I don't think it brings you the same kind of complexity of feelings. So I think there will be a place for that. I think what the museum offers is the chance to work directly with physical materials, and that can help. It can help us understand films, of course. It helps, I always say, with the material we have, which is most of which is what we call ephemera. So it's material that wasn't necessarily designed to last, but if we keep it, it can tell us a huge amount about the film, but also the moment it's made. It can also tell us about how we live now. You can see the connections between now and then. I think that's really, really significant. By offering the opportunity for students and the public to actually work with original materials, we are allowing them to understand cinema more, but we're also allowing to understand themselves and the way that we live now more as well.
Is there anything in, I guess, how researchers and students interacting with the collection differently? Because I know you were touching on how, I Like, who was it who is doing the women in film?
That's a great example. The sort of, new stories and hidden histories. So we are part of a big project called Women's Screen Work in the Archive Made Visible, led by Professor Helen Hansen. I'm part of the project team, and that's working with the BFI and some partners in the US as well. And what we're trying to do is to say, traditionally, kind of the stories of women, although cinema was actually its fan base was predominantly female until the 1950s, but women working in the films have often been overlooked. And in fact, there's far more than people thought there were. So we got this enormous script collection from Pinewood in 2020, about 1,500 scripts. I've been working on that ever since with a whole range of different volunteers. They've discovered that, in fact, there's loads of female writers in there. Those films didn't always get made, but there are some significant writers. There's Muriel Box, Diana Morgan, people like that. The postdoctoral student working on the project is called Casey Crossan. Casey's been working on these scripts to find out more about these women, alongside a whole team of volunteers who's been cataloguing that collection. And also, there's been other kinds of roles that have been ignored. So continuity supervisor, we've got a great collection that we got about 7 years ago. A lady contacted me, and we often get great things like this. She contacted me saying, moving house, I've got all these photographs that used to belong to my sister. Would you be interested? I'll bring them in. And I brought them in and I said, yes, please, because her sister was a woman called Pamela Davis, who'd been a continuity supervisor in the industry from the 40s to the 80s.
What did she work on, like feature films?
Loads of feature films, including, so there's pictures of her with Michael Powell, with Sophia Loren, Judy Garland, people like that. And continuity supervisor is a really fascinating role. You're sat by the director all day. In Pamela's day, you are sketching what's in front of the camera to make sure there's continuity from shot to shot. At the very end of her career, she's using Polaroids and things like that. There's great pictures of her sat next to David Lean or Michael Powell with her sketchbook, noting things. Then she'd have to write up her notes at the end of the day. A really demanding job, and a job that's always been done by a woman.
I was about to say, one of the first strong females I think I met on a film set was a script supervisor named Rachel Bone. She's worked on things like The Witcher and stuff like that. She's amazing. But like you said, most of the things she did was very, I guess, physical. She had tons of papers on her and she was constantly sketching around the script when we had to work around schedules and stuff like that. How much material did you get?
We got about 600 photographs. So the photographs of Pamela at work and photographs that she used for work. So from stills photographers that she would use to help put together the continuity plan for editing. And the role has always been done by a woman. It's that old thing about women are good at detail. You know. And because of that, it's never been properly acknowledged as being as important as it is. And by telling Pamela's story, we're able to show her importance, but also the importance of the other women that did that role. So that's part of the project too. So those kind of hidden histories are really significant there. So we've got lots of that material in the collection. So we've got the full archive for Babylon, one of the first great Black British films from 1980. That's in Gavrik Losey's collection. Gavrik was the producer. We've got obviously lots of Derek Jarman material, both in Don Boyd's collection and in James Mackay's collection. And we've got lots of material on kind of LGBT representation, things like that as well. So we've got a really rich collection that can be used to show all sorts of shadow histories, hidden histories, as well as the kind of recognised narrative about film history as well.
That's amazing. And tying this all together, how long has the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum been open for? It's been open for about 20 years.
30 years.
30 years. How do you think the next generation is going to remember the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum? Do you think there should be more cinema museums across the UK? Do you think, what efforts do you think need to be made, in comparison to other museum institutions?
Yeah, I think that, obviously what we're trying to do is to improve our museum and we want to get more people to come. We're just under 10,000 at the moment a year. Yeah. Obviously, we're up a hill on the edge of campus, but I think people that come here really like it. I think they understand the importance of it because it's telling our story as a people. Films reflect society. They also inform society. And yes, cinema is a relatively young medium, but it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from centuries of people thinking about new ways of seeing the world. And so our collection goes right back to the 17th century. In the sort of 200 or so years before cinema, people were making puppets, they were creating immersive panoramas, they were doing magic lanterns, making projections, making toys that moved. All of these things are part of the same story, and they're our story. Yeah. So I think that people should understand, and hopefully do understand, that cinema is central to our experience. Certainly, if you're talking about the 20th century, cinema was the dominant medium for most of that time. It's you can't think about that century without thinking about cinema, but also that continues going forward. Yes, there's all sorts of different formats, different ways of seeing things, but films, the stories, stories through moving pictures are still the way we talk about ourselves. Whether that's on film or TV or whatever. These are the ways in which we discuss how we live through these stories. So that's been the same for 400 years, and long may it continue.
I really hope, at some point in the museum, in terms of exhibitioning strategies, we get a digital screen at some point, because I feel like that would be very cool to get.
Yeah, we'd certainly hope to. With our new plans, we would obviously have some more digital interactives and more things like that. We're hoping to be able to modernise in that way in the new museum that we're working on, which hopefully will continue to develop our plans for that over the next few years.
What do you hope someone, whether it's a student or whether it's just an avid fan of film, discovers here at the Bill Cinema Museum years on from now and feels grateful for?
I'm hoping that people will see how moving pictures have changed people's lives and how they can change their life.
Yeah.
I think that's really the thing, is that, as I say, they reflect, they inform. I think people will see and will continue to see how important they've been in our story. And I think that's what I would want going forward as well. Yeah.
Now, to tie this all in together, I have developed a quickfire round of questions. I was trying to go for a very fun thing where it's this thing or this thing or but I was struggling to come up with things to, I guess, compare for, because I feel like you could, if you said, I don't know, Julia Roberts or maybe Natalie Portman, you'd be like, I don't know how to compare those two people together. But okay, we're gonna start. So
see what I can do.
Okay, Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin?
Well, I kind of like them both. I don't know. This is one of these things where people think people tend to get drawn into sides, but I kind of like them both. I do really like Chaplin. Chaplin's really interesting. I think seeing Chaplin films, I suppose they feel more. They feel maybe a bit less contemporary than Keaton does in some ways, but they are incredibly interesting, and he's so skilled, and there's so much kind of things to him. So I kind of like them both, I'd say.
What about 35mm or 4K?
Well, I'd probably go for 35mm. I mean, it becomes more difficult. 35mm, it's a really interesting story. For a long time, the film industry held out. You could do digital film a long time before most cinemas turned to it, but then there was a tipping point when it suddenly changed. And now, of course, it's really hard to get films made on 35 and projected. But yeah, the grain and look of 35, you can't beat it, really.
Have you worked with nitrate film before? And is it a miracle or is it a menace?
Well, not so much directly, but yeah, it is very dangerous. Yeah. They are doing those nitrate shows at the BFI, which are fascinating to see. I mean, it looks very beautiful, but it's a bit of a storage nightmare, so we wouldn't want it in our museum.
Wow. Okay, what is one object that you would save from a fire if you... I mean, God forbid anything would happen inside the building.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of impossible because there's so many things you want to save. I mean, obviously, probably the most obvious.
How many boxes would you have stacked?
Yes, we're well over 1,000. So that's really tough. I mean, obviously, probably the most obvious thing would be our original cinematograph. It's probably our most valuable item. I guess one little thing that we have, which we're pretty sure is unique, that is connected with the same kind of topic, is we have a little postcard, which is a menu invitation for the first private view of the kinetoscope in 1894. Wow.
Okay, that's really
So it's this kind of menu card with a picture of a stork in a waiter's outfit, so it looks pretty weird. But you can make a good case that's the first showing of moving pictures in Britain.
Wow.
These are always contested, but that's before the Lumiere show. It's not projected, but it's we think that's the only one surviving, that card. So that's pretty unique. So that's kind of special.
Okay. What do you think is one film everyone should see at least one time in their life?
Well, I'm going to be predictable here, but I'm going to say Bill Douglas's films.
Okay.
I think Bill was an amazing artist. I think if you look at those films, not they're not to everyone's taste, but the people that like them really like them.
How would you describe his films to people? I guess the listeners.
Poetic realism.
Poetic.
I suppose. So the Bill Douglas trilogy, which is bleak but beautiful, and it's not always an easy watch, but always remember it has a happy ending. I would say so. The final 2 minutes of the trilogy, I think, are the most beautiful things that you can ever see on screen.
Because he did the trilogy. Those were 3 films.
3 films.
What were the themes surrounding those films?
They're based around his own life.
Yeah.
So Bill came from an extremely impoverished background in the Scottish mining communities just outside Edinburgh. He was very neglected. Had a really, really sort of disturbed upbringing. So the first film is about my childhood. It's about his young days. Then there's one called My Ain Folk, which again is about his childhood and the sort of family breakdown, everything. And then the final film, My Way Home, starts off as he kind of leaves care in Scotland, and then he goes to join the RAF in Egypt. So this will feature in our exhibition. And that's where he meets Peter, and that's where he finds a new way to live. And the final couple of minutes of that film are just the most beautiful things you've ever seen. And yes, it is bleak, but until that moment, it's a completely kind of uplifting.
That sounds beautiful. I'm gonna have to check that out because I feel like I have researched a bit about Bill and I guess Peter's relationship a lot, because it's very beautiful. I guess how a friendship can develop for that long, especially I guess recently with I guess digital intimacy. I feel like sometimes you can feel so socially out of touch with people, and I guess you can kind of admire and kind of be like, it's a beautiful thing.
And Bill's film Comrades is also great. That uses a lot of the collection. That's about the Tolpot and Martyrs. So it's a historical film. It's a big epic. So whereas the trilogy is black and white and very spare, this is a big 3-hour epic, using all this idea of pre-cinema as a new ways to see the world, like the Tolpot and Martyrs did. And that's an amazing film because it was partly filmed in my hometown. I did see it when it came out, which most people never got the chance to do. So I'd certainly advise anyone to see that as well.
Yeah, I mean, also like in terms of Bill's films as well. So he did like fictional films as well. So he did the trilogy, then he did this historical
that's what he did.
He specialised in fiction specifically.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he was, I guess you'd call it poetic realism. They're sort of art house films, I guess. But they are stories about people. They have emotional connections. There's not a lot of dialogue. There's lots of faces. There's lots of, it's all about the image. And Bill, sadly, he never, because it was a real bad time for the film industry, he had a couple of other big projects in mind. He was going to do a adaptation of Confessions of a Justified Sinner. He was going to make a film about Muybridge, Flying Horse. He scripted all those, but then he died before they could be made.
Yeah, he died from cancer, didn't he?
That's right, back in 1991. I would urge anyone to see a Bill Douglas film.
Who do you think is the most underrated filmmaker working today? Or who do you think is the most underrated working, I guess, someone you can admire in the film industry today?
I don't know. I did look at this question and think that's really hard. I mean, there are some really interesting filmmakers. What it can be really hard now is to get a successive body of work.
Definitely.
So you can make a first film, and then do you get the chance to make a second one?
The filmography can be really varied.
So somebody like Lynn Ramsey is somebody who's worth admiring. She's obviously a big supporter of Bill's as well, And I haven't seen all her films, but Ratcatcher, her first film, is a really interesting film. She takes a lot of risks, I think, and she's not always been appreciated for it.
I love the cinematography, personally.
Yeah.
I love how rugged it is and how intimate it can feel, I guess, especially when it comes to family dynamics, I guess, in a domestic space. I personally love that about her work. Yeah.
So over about nearly 30 years now, she's trod her own path, Now she's making films predominantly in America now. I'm not seeing the latest one, but,
No, I know she released something fairly recently.
Yeah, one with Jennifer Lawrence, wasn't it? Dying My Love, but I haven't had a chance to see that yet. But I think she's interesting, and the way that she's kind of ploughed on in the face of adversity, I think is very, admirable.
Who do you think is one filmmaker people argue about way too much?
With arguing about people, it's everyone has particular tastes.
I was thinking about this question as well because I was thinking about I guess growing up, taking A-level film and being around so many other budding young filmmakers who, we all have so many, I guess, loud opinions. One of the main ones I think I got was, I hate Tarantino. He's so weird. Oh, he's just so weird. I don't like him. Specific taste.
It is, yeah. And there's some certain filmmakers who are, you're either going to like Wes Anderson or you're not. It's a very particular kind of aesthetic that people look for from film to film. There's certain filmmakers I really like. There's others sort of. I'm not a mad Kubrick fan. I like The Shining, but I'm not. It's a bit chilly for my taste. But some people really love him. I think there's filmmakers that have got all sorts. There's all sorts of interesting things there. In films, even if you don't always like the films, I think Hitchcock's always interesting, even though, you wouldn't invite him round your house, but, but he's, but there's always interesting things to think about and say. It's always complex enough that it can carry a whole range of different meanings depending on what you bring to it, I think. And
finally, probably know the answer for this one, but physical archive or digital vault?
Well, it'd have to be the physical archive, wouldn't it? Yeah, that's what we've been living on, but I just think that's more more engaging in all sorts of different kind of ways. Digital stuff needs to be preserved too. That's proving very difficult, and we need to find a way to do that. But the physical archive, I think, will always be there. If something's a physical thing, if you look after it, it'll always be there, and I think that's something special.
I think I definitely know other students who I think definitely try and adhere themselves to, I guess, accumulating a really nice DVD collection, especially within their time in uni, because I think you're like, oh, wow, this is really interesting to see how they've arranged this on a page. I guess it's not even only for the stylistic purposes, but also just have that physical memory there of I put this DVD in, I watched this film with so-and-so, and
you can have it, you can watch it any time.
Exactly.
Which might not be the case with streamers or the internet or whatever, So, if it's yours, you've got it. So, I'm a bit of a hoarder as well.
Okay. I want to end this kind of where we began. And at the start of this episode, I asked you, the listener, if you've ever walked into a museum and wondered who really decides what ends up in it. This conversation was for you. And I'm really excited that looking at, I guess, different aspects of the build-up list in a museum, because I have the pleasure of looking at, I guess, the more social aspects with Sarah and also with Matt as well, and his different experiences, I guess, to you. And what I found kind of comforting, I guess, is while studying here, is that film history isn't fixed. We've clearly established that here. And it's still being shaped, it's still being questioned, and it's still open to being looked at very, very differently. And I guess what feels especially important here is because this museum isn't just somewhere you visit once and have a walk around and leave behind. It's a working collection. And I feel like people need to understand that this is a very, I guess, important collection of work. And I think it's very underrated. I think in my mind, I think that's what kind of prompted me to do this podcast episode and get more involved in the museum. Because I feel like on a more personal level, when you look at films and when you look at marketing and when you look at all the glitz and glam of it all, at the end of the day, it's an image that subjectively speaks to you. And it really means something to you at the end of the day. And within the whole working collection of the ephemera, there is something here that students, researchers, and visitors can all actively use in a very accessible manner.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that one of the greatest pleasures for me, one of the things I most enjoyed in the job, is working with students, working with volunteers like yourself. And that's been incredibly rewarding. And we wouldn't be able to function as a museum without the work of volunteers. So that really has been, one of the greatest pleasures, and one of the things that I think we do best as a museum is obviously we're really lucky in having a great resource here at the university of lots of really intelligent and interesting people, young people who've got at the beginnings of their careers who want to engage with what we do. And, I think that is, one of the things I'm most proud of.
Yeah. How can people get in contact with you to like discuss volunteer opportunities, or when does, I guess, the opportunities arise, or like?
Usually there'll be a bit of change at the beginning of each term. So if you just email us, bdc@exeter.ac.uk, then we'll get in touch.
It's the beginning of the term now. It's
yeah,
a good,
it
it's
is.
a good time.
I've already had 3 this week.
Amazing.
We'll discuss it. Yeah, but obviously I remember we met when you were in the first year and you came to the museum. We had a chat and take it from there. And obviously you've given us a great deal since you've worked with us. So yeah, we're really grateful.
I just want to say thank you so much for the work that you do within the Bill Douglason Museum during the time that you've been here, and also just taking the time out today to talk about what you have done here at the museum and also the whole story, because I feel like we've touched on a lot. We've touched on Bill Douglas, Peter Jewell. We've talked on, I guess, the stuff this museum is doing, has done, is going to do, and there's so much more to look forward to, especially when it comes to the Bill Douglason Museum.
Thank you, Simran. Really enjoyed it.
No worries, and thank you very much for listening, and until next time.